June the 18th, 2023. Early evening, Bowness Close, Coventry. A quiet residential street concealed a betrayal more chilling than anyone imagined. A 44-year-old woman, Antoinette Sheppard, walked calmly through her front door just hours before her home would become the scene of a calculated killing. Sheppard, once seen simply as a troubled local figure, now stood at the center of one of Coventry's most disturbing crimes. How could a woman who posed as a friend turn a teenager into an accomplice and a neighbor into a victim? This was not a moment of impulse, but a deliberate plan driven by greed, manipulation, and control. Inside Coventry's most notorious women is see full list of female criminals and life sentences. Welcome to UK Real Crime, where Coventry's streets whisper hidden truths and the county's most dangerous offenders are finally unmasked. Today, we uncover the astonishing case of Antoinette Sheppard, the teenager she manipulated, and the pensioner whose trust cost him his life step by step as it truly happened. What you're about to hear may stay with you long after this story ends. First offender, Antoinette Sheppard, 44 years old. June the 18th, 2023, Bowness Close, Coventry. A quiet summer evening would soon reveal one of the city's most disturbing betrayals. Antoinette Sheppard, a 44-year-old woman from Coventry, was known locally as a troubled figure. What few understood was the extent of her influence over a 17-year-old boy named Kieran Spicer, with whom she shared what the court later called a bizarre relationship. Together, they would carry out a pre-planned, shocked every person in their county. Their victim was Michael Brady, a vulnerable 70-plus-year-old pensioner who believed Sheppard was his friend. CCTV later confirmed that Mr. Brady willingly entered her home shortly after 6 in the evening. What he did not know was that, at that very moment, messages were being exchanged between Sheppard and Spicer, discussing robbing him and what they intended to do next. Once inside, the attack began. Spicer repeatedly struck Mr. Brady with a machete-like blade, landing blows to his head and shoulder. He stamped on the pensioner's chest and made him have several crushed bones. As Mr. Brady lay injured, pleading for his life, Sheppard used a blue rope to strangle him, ending the assault. The pair then stole his bank card, using the pin they had forced from him to withdraw more than £300, which they spent on alcohol at a nearby shop. To hide the crime, they placed Mr. Brady's body inside a large television box and dragged it into an outdoor shed. Neighbors later reported concerns, prompting officers to attend the address, search the shed, and make the grim discovery. Sheppard was arrested at the scene. Spicer was detained later after telling a social worker he had been asked to hide a body. The investigation by West Midlands Police was detailed and methodical. Detectives pieced together CCTV footage, recovered the pair's phone messages showing clear pre-planning, and matched the withdrawal of cash to the stolen card. During interviews, both defendants attempted to blame one another, but the evidence pointed to joint responsibility for a sustained, deliberate attack. In December 2023, a jury at Warwick Crown Court found both defendants guilty of murder. Sheppard was later sentenced in February 2024 to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years. Spicer received a minimum term of 18 years. The court described the crime as a planned and exceptionally brutal act carried out against a defenseless man. Mr. Brady's family said they struggled to comprehend the violence inflicted on someone so gentle and trusting. They described the experience of informing loved ones of his murder as surreal and devastating. As we reflect on cases like this, it becomes clear how easily trust can be exploited. Looking at the circumstances, 3 lessons stand out. Be cautious when someone suddenly seeks access to your home or finances. Take concerns about manipulation or grooming seriously, especially when minors are involved. And always report sudden changes in a vulnerable person's behavior or associations. In the end, this case reminds us that danger can sometimes come disguised as friendship. Second offender, Shanley, 36 years old. September the 17th, 2024. Edmund Road, Coventry. A quiet street, a shared home, and a relationship eroded by alcohol and control, until one moment of violence turned everything irreversible. Shanley, a 36-year-old mother from Coventry, had been in a turbulent relationship with her partner, 34-year-old Alfred Jamie Corbett, a man whom his family described as gentle, loyal, and increasingly vulnerable under the strain of Shanley's escalating drinking and coercive behavior. Hours before the fatal attack, Shanley had been out drinking heavily with friends. Mr. Corbett had been at a staff event. They returned separately to his home on Edmund Road in the early hours of the morning. What began as a familiar argument about her excessive drinking quickly spiraled into something catastrophic. Mr. Corbett pleaded with her to put the knife down. Instead, Shanley picked up a large kitchen knife and drove it into his chest, inflicting an 11-centimeter deep wound. Moments later, she reportedly knelt beside him and shouted, "What have I done?" At 4 o'clock in the morning, emergency services were called. Shanley immediately attempted to divert responsibility, telling officers that Mr. Corbett had arrived home already bleeding. Inside the address, police recovered the murder weapon in the kitchen sink. Another woman present in the house later told investigators that Shanley had asked her to lie to police, "Have you got my back?" She was arrested right away. Throughout interviews, Shanley continued denying the killing, though she eventually admitted she had stabbed him. The Crown's case centered on the pattern of manipulation and control Shanley had exercised over the victim in the days leading up to his death. At Warwick Crown Court, jurors heard evidence of that coercive dynamic, of the couple's drinking-fueled conflicts, and of the fatal escalation that ended Mr. Corbett's life on his own kitchen floor. On October 1, 2025, Shanley was found guilty of murder. Days later, she was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years. The community's reaction was marked by sorrow. Another domestic homicide, another family shattered. Mr. Corbett's loved ones described their grief as lifelong and overwhelming, adding that Shanley had left a void nothing will ever fill. Their statement reinforced the court's perspective. This was not an isolated explosion of violence, but the tragic culmination of a toxic and controlling relationship. The case drew attention to the often hidden nature of coercive behavior within intimate relationships, reminding many that violence does not always begin with a weapon. Sometimes it begins with fear, control, and silence. And in that silence, one life ended, and another was bound to decades behind bars, a stark reminder that a single moment can shatter everything. Third offender, Ellie Wain, 18 years old. June 1, 2020, Middle Ride, Willenhall, Coventry. A quiet estate, an on-off teenage relationship, and one alcohol-fueled confrontation that would end a life before adulthood had truly begun. Ellie Wain, 18 years old and described as little more than a child, lived on Middle Ride in Willenhall with her boyfriend, 18-year-old Kieran Brown. Their relationship, volatile and frequently unsettled. On that June evening, following hours of drinking and cannabis use, a familiar row escalated into a shocking event. Earlier that day, Wain and Brown argued inside the flat. In anger, she demanded he leave, pushing the conflict from the home into the street. There, Wain armed herself with a fearsome kitchen knife taken from their flat. Witnesses observed the pair in a heated confrontation outside the property before a scuffle took them both to the ground. During that struggle, Wain delivered a single stab wound to Kieran's chest, a 12-inch deep penetration through the heart. He was rushed to hospital by a relative, but was pronounced dead shortly after 10 o'clock that night. Ellie Wain was arrested on the night of June 1, 2020, shortly after Kieran Brown was taken to hospital with the fatal stab wound. In particular, police arrived at the scene on Middle Ride, recovered the knife quickly, spoke to Wain, and arrested her soon afterward. When officers informed her that Kieran had died, she initially insisted they were lying. Detectives from West Midlands Police launched a detailed investigation. CCTV footage from the area provided a clear timeline of events outside the address. At the scene and later in interviews, Wain initially claimed the stabbing was accidental, insisting she had armed herself only for protection and that she didn't mean to intentionally stab him. She also alleged that the victim had hit her frequently. The prosecution countered this with forensic evidence, the depth of the wound, and Wain's earlier recorded comment to a witness that she would stab anyone that came near her. At Coventry Crown Court, a jury heard detailed testimony about the couple's unstable relationship and the events leading to the stabbing. The court rejected Wain's claims of accident or self-defense and found her guilty of murder in December 2020. On December 22nd, she received a mandatory life sentence with a minimum term of 17 years before eligibility for parole. Community reaction focused heavily on the tragedy of two lives cut apart by one moment of teenage rage. Detective Inspector Adam Jobson, who led the investigation, stated publicly that the case underscored the fatal consequences of carrying knives. Kieran's family described their grief as a life sentence, emphasizing the lost future of a son, grandson, and great-grandson who would never grow into the adulthood taken from him. They pointedly contrasted their permanent loss with the reality that Wain, someday, may still rebuild a life after prison. In the end, the case left a stark reminder etched across Coventry. In a single angry moment, irreversible harm was done proving how quickly impulsive violence can destroy every life it touches. Fourth offender, Ramona Budiencea, 22 years old. January 30th, 2013, Falls Hill, Coventry. It began with a betrayal so sharp it would fracture a friendship, a life, and the fragile bond of trust that brought a young woman to the UK seeking a better future. At the center of the case was Ramona Budiencea, a 22-year-old Romanian woman whose arrival in Britain had been made possible by her best friend, Georgiana Stuparu. Budiencea, a normal woman, makes a wrong decision that she regrets for the rest of her life. The events unfolded on that January evening when Berger, desperate, indebted, and on the run, devised a plan to retrieve money he and Budiencea owed Georgiana. Disguised as a client, he entered her flat at Culworth Court. When Georgiana recognized him, an argument erupted over the debt. Berger had come prepared. He brought with him a knife he had purchased from Waitrose. In the violent struggle that followed, he stabbed her 4 times in the chest, with one wound piercing her heart. His own later admission that he had looked for her heart because he really wanted her dead marked the brutality of the act. Immediately afterward, Berger called Budiencea. She did not participate in the killing, but she did participate in what followed. Together, they dragged Georgiana's body from the kitchen into the bedroom, attempting to stage the scene to resemble an attack by a client or pimp. Using towels, they wiped the blood from the floors. They disposed of the murder knife and blood-soaked clothing in Woodland near Lakeview Road, even attempting to burn some items in a bin. Budiencea also attempted to impersonate the victim by texting Georgiana's pimp, attempting to give the illusion she was still alive. Their escape unraveled quickly. The crucial mistake, selling one of Georgiana's mobile phones at a city centre shop, allowed police to trace the pair. They were arrested at a hotel on Fairfax Street on February 1st, 2013. During early interviews, they lied, blaming one another, but mobile phone records, CCTV footage, and forensic findings established their actions. Police confirmed that Budiencea was not present during the stabbing, narrowing her involvement to assistance after the fact. Budiencea pleaded guilty to assisting an offender and was sentenced on October 16, 2013, at Warwickshire Justice Centre to 2 years and 4 months in prison. Her early plea significantly reduced her sentence. Berger, the perpetrator of the murder, received a life sentence. The victim's family, who could not afford to repatriate Georgiana's body, buried her in Coventry and expressed relief that justice had been delivered. This case, rooted in desperation, misplaced loyalty, and violent deception, leaves a lingering truth. When someone helps to hide a crime, they bury more than evidence. They bury the humanity owed to every victim. Fifth offender, Annette Slevin, 54 years old. December 24th, 2015, Coventry, West Midlands. Sometimes, a family argument becomes the first crack before a long-buried history of violence resurfaces with devastating force. The case centered on Annette Slevin, a 54-year-old woman from Birdgrove Court in Coventry. She was no stranger to the criminal justice system. Years earlier, she had been jailed for the manslaughter of her brother, Noel, whom she fatally beat with a mop in 2008. Released on license, this time, her sister, Carol Slevin, became her victim. The incident unfolded across Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, 2015. Carol and a nephew visited Annette's flat to prepare the Christmas turkey. A dispute escalated, and Annette struck Carol, leaving her with 2 black eyes. Carol left but returned the next day to continue preparations. By then, Annette had been drinking vodka heavily. Blaming her sister for burning the turkey, she launched a second, far more violent attack. It began with Annette hitting Carol over the head with a hard-cased flask and pulling her hair. As Carol attempted repeatedly to escape, Annette seized a claw hammer, and her sister's knees, arms, and hands were extremely injured. Carol pleaded with her to stop, but was dragged back each time she tried to reach the door. The assault ended only when Annette discarded the hammer. Carol collapsed to the floor, unable to stand or reach the bed, ultimately falling asleep where she lay. In the early hours of Boxing Day, relatives arrived, saw Carol's injuries, and contacted police. Officers recovered the claw hammer, which bore both blood and hair, and found Annette injured as well. Annette Slevin was arrested in the early hours of December 26, 2015. During interviews, she attempted to evade responsibility by presenting a prepared statement accusing other family members of assaulting her claims that briefly led to their arrests before evidence contradicted her account. Investigators from West Midlands Police carefully reconstructed the events. They noted Annette's intoxication, the nature of the weapons used, the repeated assaults across 2 days, and the fact that Carol's fear of being killed was not unreasonable, given Noel's earlier death. Evidence from the 2008 manslaughter case, more than 200 blunt trauma injuries inflicted with a mop, also contextualized the severity of Annette's violence. In July 2016, at Warwick Crown Court, Annette Slevin pleaded guilty to inflicting grievous bodily harm with intent. Judge Andrew Lockhart QC imposed an extended sentence of 12 years, citing aggravating factors: her previous conviction for killing her brother, the similarities between the two incidents, her intoxication, and the danger she posed to the public. She was ordered to serve at least 2/3 of the custodial term before the parole board could consider her release. Carol's statement expressed deep fear, recalling that she genuinely believed she was going to be killed. The court acknowledged the lingering trauma within the family, already marked by Noel's earlier death. This case stands as a stark reminder that unchecked violence within families rarely begins or ends with a single moment. When past harm resurfaces, it reveals how deeply one person's choices can fracture the people closest to them. Sixth offender, Faye Gowdy, 44 years old, and Bethany Donohoe, 24 years old. July the 12th, 2022, Grosvenor Road, Coventry. On a warm July night in Coventry, a sudden act of violence set off a chain of decisions that would expose loyalty, secrecy, and the weight of consequence. 40-year-old Andrew Flamson was struck by a Mondeo driven the wrong way up a one-way street. The driver, Ashley Donald, had aimed the vehicle at him during a row over a drug debt. Flamson, who had been walking his dog, sustained catastrophic head injuries and died 3 days later in the hospital. What followed was not only a murder investigation but also the unraveling of a secondary crime committed quietly in the background. The offenders, Faye Gowdy, 44, and Bethany Donohoe, 23, acted with notable speed after the collision. Within hours, Donald contacted both his mother and his girlfriend. Gowdy transferred money directly to Donohoe, and Donohoe used that money to purchase 2 ferry tickets to Ireland, enabling herself and Donald to leave the United Kingdom just 2 days after the fatal impact. Their actions did not involve physical violence, but they formed an intentional and coordinated effort to help a murderer evade justice. The investigation into Flamson's death was led by Detective Inspector Tom Lyons. Detectives traced the escape route using detailed mobile phone records, CCTV footage, and bank transaction analysis. These elements revealed the financial transfers, the travel bookings, and the timing of each step taken by Gowdy and Donohoe. Once the evidence was mapped, officers moved quickly. July the 19th, 2022, marked the moment both women were taken into custody. Gowdy was arrested at her home in Edgbaston. Donohoe, returning from Ireland, was detained immediately upon landing at Birmingham Airport. Meanwhile, Donald, whose escape the two women had financed later, returned voluntarily in September and surrendered to detectives at Coventry Police Station. Gowdy and Donohoe were tried at Leamington Crown Court, where the prosecution presented clear evidence of deliberate assistance, the transfer of funds, the ferry bookings, and the swift coordination following the killing. Both were convicted of assisting an offender. Donohoe, whose involvement included traveling with Donald to Ireland, was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Gowdy received a 24-month suspended sentence, alongside a 6-month electronic monitoring requirement, with a curfew from 7 in the evening to 7 in the morning. Reaction from the victim's family centered on relief. Andrew Flamson's mother, Janice Lees, expressed satisfaction that all individuals who aided the escape attempt were held accountable. While the case did not spark international outcry or broad public protest, it resonated locally as a reminder of the far-reaching damage caused when individuals choose protection over justice. The case of Gowdy and Donohoe stands as a stark illustration of how a single violent act can pull others into its wake, not through force, but through choices made in its aftermath. Even the quietest decisions can echo loudly when weighed in the balance of justice. 7th offender, Elena Gugulan, 30 years old. April the 1st, 2023, Willenhall, Coventry. A quiet pattern of movement across Britain's supermarkets concealed a crime far larger than it first appeared, one built on repetition, coordination, and profit. What began was a routine stop by officers responding to a shoplifting alert. At the center of it stood Elena Gugulan, 30 years old, from Kalina Close in Willenhall, Coventry. Known to investigators as part of a Romanian organized crime group, she traveled across England and Wales targeting retailer after retailer. Her partner in the operation, Andrei Theodore Cretu, 27, acted with equal precision. Together, they struck at least 31 stores over more than a year. Their crimes, committed between April 2023 and August 2024, were defined not by violence, but by breadth and organization. Using a hire car, they moved across 23 policing areas, repeatedly selecting high-value, easily resold items, razor blades, face creams, toothbrushes, nappies, nicotine pouches. The stolen goods accumulated into tens of thousands of pounds, with losses estimated between £78,000 and £95,000. The victims were not individuals but businesses and the wider retail community affected by rising theft and operational disruption. The turning point came when police stopped a vehicle linked to one of their thefts. Inside, officers recovered £1,333 worth of stolen merchandise. Cretu was arrested immediately. As detectives expanded their inquiry, information emerged that Cretu was part of a broader organized group operating across the country. CCTV footage captured Cretu repeatedly raiding Morrison's stores, while phone records and travel data linked both suspects to patterns of movement, matching the missing stock. Gugulan was found as a co-conspirator. Though her exact arrest date was not documented publicly, evidence accumulated rapidly, and she ultimately faced 31 charges of shop theft and 1 attempted theft, all of which she admitted. The case advanced to Hull Crown Court, where Gugulan pleaded guilty and stood for sentencing in March 2025. Prosecutors emphasized the organized, persistent nature of the crimes, insisting they were not impulsive acts, but structured thefts carried out with deliberate planning. Cretu, already convicted earlier, had similarly admitted guilt for his role. The court described the scheme as serious, organized, acquisitive crime, not the low-level shoplifting often associated with isolated offenders. The judge imposed a custodial sentence of 3 years and 4 months, reflecting both the scale of the losses and the coordinated method of the crimes. Authorities also noted that, as a foreign national offender, Gugulan was likely to be deported following her release. Public reaction highlighted the growing concern over organized retail theft. PC Elijah Hartley stated that shop theft affects businesses, customers, retail staff, and wider communities, stressing the importance of holding those responsible to account. The case did not trigger national protest or international attention, but law enforcement agencies pointed to it as a clear example of how persistent, coordinated theft could undermine retailers across multiple regions. Though non-violent, the operation carried a significant economic impact, one felt silently by stores, staff, and customers, long before the offenders were caught. Even when a crime leaves no physical scars, its consequences can ripple farther than the eye can see. Final offender, Kirsty Reilly, 32 years old. March 6, 2025, Lincolnshire. A routine sentencing day quietly revealed the depth of a drug network stretching far beyond local borders. Kirsty Reilly, 32, from Wappenbury Road in Coventry, was identified as a key driver within a major Class A conspiracy supplying crack cocaine and heroin from the West Midlands to Skegness. She had no public record of serious violence, yet the people around her operated a structured, financially motivated network known as the ABS line. This system has central figures, which included courier Connor Darwent, organizer Alistair Renwick, Nathan and Sarah Makey, and Liam Tompkins, alongside 3 vulnerable teenagers exploited by the group. Before the investigation, Reilly lived an otherwise unremarkable life in Coventry, but maintained frequent contact with several individuals later shown to be co-conspirators. The ABS line and associated drug routes operated with predictable courier cycles and fixed communication structures, enabling a supply of crack, cocaine, and heroin considered both consistent and profitable. In September 2022, violent disputes between drug groups in Lincolnshire drew police scrutiny. Intelligence quickly identified repeated Coventry to Skegness travel, linked to phone lines coordinating Class A distribution, including the ABS line. Surveillance revealed frequent West Midlands journeys coinciding with spikes in coastal drug availability, with Darwent emerging early as a primary courier. As analysts mapped communication chains, evidence led back to Coventry. Reilly's role surfaced gradually. Phone data, travel records, and contact patterns showed she was a consistent driver, functioning as a pivotal cog in the county lines route. Courier Connor Darwent was repeatedly observed traveling between Coventry and Skegness, reloading the ABS line with new Class A supply. CCTV documented recurring vehicle movements matching known delivery windows, while phone data later confirmed that each journey aligned with measurable increases in local drug availability. When the network realized police surveillance was active, several members abruptly left Skegness and returned to Coventry, a shift reflected through altered phone usage and a sharp reduction in their physical presence in the coastal area. Further monitoring linked Kirsty Reilly to multiple transport journeys, communication exchanges, and logistical coordination. Investigators estimated that the conspiracy moved between 8.7 kilograms and 26.8 kilograms of Class A drugs, with an overall value exceeding £252,000. Based on consolidated intelligence, police executed coordinated warrants early the following year, detaining 70 suspects across 8 drug lines, including Reilly. Lincolnshire Police's Serious and Organised Crime Unit led the operation, analysing roughly 4.2 million lines of mobile phone data. Digital specialists mapped the network's routes, confirming consistent movement between supply bases and coastal distribution points. Search warrants recovered phones linking Reilly to couriers and overseers such as Renwick. Safeguarding teams also located 3 exploited teenagers, with interviews and device extractions confirming their involvement. At Lincoln Crown Court, prosecutors presented communication analysis, travel data, and organizational mapping, confirming Reilly's role as a pivotal cog in the conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. The judge cited the scale of the network and the exploitation of youths as aggravating factors. Reilly pleaded guilty and received a 3-year custodial sentence. Community reaction focused on the wider harm caused by County Lines activity. Residents in Skegness and Coventry expressed relief, citing reduced antisocial behavior and violence. Police emphasized the strain such networks place on neighborhoods and vulnerable youths. Families of safeguarded teenagers welcomed the intervention, noting its meaningful long-term impact. These events highlight enduring cautions. Stay alert to unusual travel patterns or frequent comings and goings. Recognize signs of youth exploitation, such as secrecy or sudden gifts, and report suspicious communication routes that suggest organized activity. Invisible systems thrive when communities stop paying attention. Vigilance is the first barrier against exploitation. Before you go, take a moment to consider this. If an operation as large as the ABS line could run quietly between 2 ordinary English towns for years, how many more hidden networks are still out there, operating in plain sight? Every case we cover leaves behind a trail of unanswered questions, and the next one may be unfolding just a few streets from where you live. If you want to stay ahead of the next major UK investigation, make sure you subscribe to UK Real Crime and hit the notification bell so you're the first to see each new episode as soon as it drops. And now it's your turn. Which case should we uncover next? Leave your suggestions in the comments, and your idea could shape our next deep dive into the hidden world of British crime.